Good afternoon. My name is Harri Lloyd Davies, and I'm a partner here at Bevan and Buckland Chartered Accountants. And today's webinar is going to cover off the key updates that we've seen in the last week since our first webinar, and hopefully cover off the key things that you need to be doing at this time. Today is the 2nd of April 2020, and we are confident that most of the information that's in today's webinar is correct as of today. But obviously, if you're watching or recording this webinar, please make sure that you do go through and check the up-to-date advice, as things are changing on a regular basis. So in terms of what I want to cover off today, the key things are the main government support that's out there to support you. But I also want to give a little bit of an insight into the reality of what we're seeing on the ground, which does differ somewhat from the theory of what you're reading in the press, and certainly what is coming out of the mouths of some of the politicians. I also want to then touch on some of the future support that we believe is available or is becoming available in the next few days and weeks, and then also what the key actions I think you need to be taking today and over the next few days. So to kick off, here are, we believe, the main areas of support that's currently available to businesses in Wales. There's probably some specific sector support not covered here, but we're looking at the general support that's available to most businesses. So I'm going to touch on the new business grant scheme, which we expect to go live in Wales in the next few days, talk about the coronavirus job retention scheme, the ability to defer VAT and other tax payments, there's statutory sick pay relief for SMEs, and talk a little bit about that. 12-month business rates holidays for a lot of sectors, and we'll touch on those. And then grants specifically for smaller and medium businesses in certain sectors. I'll remind you how you apply for those if you haven't already done so. And then we're going to look at debt to finish, focusing on the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme, the revenue time to pay schemes. Development Bank of Wales have launched something this week, which we think is really good, and we'll go through that. And then finally, I'm going to talk briefly at the end about the self-employed funding, which was announced by the Chancellor at the end of last week. So to start with, the new Welsh Government grants are now available. This is what's been announced. Grants of £10,000 for micro businesses employing up to 9 people. 100,000 for medium firms, and other grants for larger firms. So unfortunately, very little detail on this as yet. But we're told that you'll be able to start applying for these grants from next week. But one thing I did pick up at the bottom of the press release that came out to announce this is that it will only apply if you have been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. No great surprise there, but will only apply to businesses that employ staff and are VAT registered. And that immediately discounts some of the businesses who've been badly affected but are under that VAT threshold turnover. So if that is still the case when the full details are sent out next week, that is going to have an impact. But certainly something which is going to be of interest to an awful lot of businesses, I would have thought. So keep an eye out for that when it comes out next week. I just want to touch briefly then on the coronavirus job retention scheme. This is the scheme where if you put your staff onto furlough as you no longer have work for them, you can now claim back 80% of their salaries. There was a lot of questions on this in the first webinar that we did last week. Some of those questions have been answered over the last 7 days. There have been a little bit more detail that has come out. But in reality, there's still an awful lot of questions out there. We don't know when the portal will go live. We don't know how quickly the money's going to come back in. We're not certain that you will be able to claim this money if you're a one-man band director. So there are a lot of big questions still surrounding this scheme, but certainly there are huge numbers of staff who have now been furloughed, and lots of businesses are expecting to claim back 80% of their costs when all of that information is available later, hopefully we think this month. Deferring of VAT and income tax payments. I just want to touch briefly on these again. So you do not have to pay your VAT this quarter if you don't want to. You can cancel a direct debit, and it is vitally important. That was something which has become clear this week. They will still collect your money unless you cancel your direct debit. So you still need to do your VAT return, send it in as usual. But if you cancel your direct debit or don't send them the money, you will have until, we believe, April next year before you now have to pay the VAT. And similarly with income tax for payments on account in July, those have been deferred, so you will not have to pay those in July 2020. You'll instead have to pay them with the rest of your tax bill in January 2021. And because those aren't collected by direct debits, there's nothing we believe you have to do for that. That's an automatic relief. Statutory sick pay. So that was something that was cancelled a few years ago, but now you can claim back the first 2 weeks of statutory sick pay that you pay out to eligible employees over the next couple of weeks. This only applies to small and medium companies, so bear that in mind. But it's important that you remember to put this through your payroll properly. We again don't know the detail of how you'll be able to claim that back as yet, but hopefully that's information we'll get in the coming days. Next, I want to talk a bit about business rates relief and grants that are already available in Wales. So they've announced that all retail, leisure and hospitality businesses will get 1 full year of rates relief in the 2020-2021 year, which is the one that we started yesterday. And that means you'll have to pay no rates during that time if you're in those sectors. Nothing you need to do, as we understand it, to apply for those businesses, but just one to watch out for. They've announced, I think, in the last day or so that it will not apply to properties with rateable value of over $500,000. Now, that's very few and far between, but it does mean that the vast majority of businesses in retail, leisure and hospitality will have a year rates-free this year. And more importantly, and probably one of the most important things for people watching today, is the grants that are available for certain businesses. So if you've got a premises with a rateable value of under 12,000 or less, you are eligible for a £10,000 grant. And if your business has 2 of these premises, you can get 2 lots of £10,000. As I understand it, if you've got 3 and they're all in the same local authority, you can only claim it on 2. But I believe if you've got multiple properties around different local authorities, you can claim 2 in each area. So something which is very useful for a lot of businesses. For slightly larger businesses, rateable value for between 12 and 51,000 in the worst affected sectors, which they regard as retail, leisure and hospitality, you get a £25,000 grant. And those same rules, as I understand it, apply. You can apply for more than one if you've got more than one premises. And the key thing to really get across today is that these forms are available. You can apply for them on the local authority in question's website, and I'd highly recommend you do so. It was announced at the beginning, and I'm not doubting them that this money will come to you automatically, but certainly we've seen lots of our customers already have that cash, and the ones who've received it are the ones who actually got on the phone and applied, or got onto the website and applied for it. So we strongly recommend, if you haven't already done so and you're eligible for one of those grants, get onto the local authority website, apply for it, and we're seeing that cash hit people's banks within literally 4 or 5 days. So it's been a really useful way to get money into businesses in the short term. And I've just got a little bit of detail on that slide there with some of the key local authorities where generally most of our clients are based. Those are the links if you're looking for them on the websites to go to. They're all on our website if you need to find them again, and on the Welsh Government website. So I now want to turn to some of the debt that's available. And there was a lot of fuss made about the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, or CBILS as it's become known. This was a new loan scheme announced initially by the Chancellor in his budget, which seems like a lifetime ago, but it was only last month. And in that, he announced loans of up to £5 million for businesses that are a turnover of less than £45 million. We've already had a number of our customers who, since this went live last week, have applied for it. But unfortunately, I think the 2 that certainly have heard back have both been turned down on the basis that they qualified, or the business was eligible for a general commercial loan and didn't need this new loan. Those have been questioned, but I've also seen a lot of concern in the press and other sources about the fact that the banks are overwhelmed and don't really have the capacity to deal with all of these applications that are coming in. They seem to be fairly slow. There's a lot of detail being required and a lot of concerns. An awful lot of personal guarantees have been asked to be put in place, which is felt to be sort of not really in the spirit of why these schemes were put in place in the first place. So, as I say, it is there. If you're really struggling, we strongly recommend you do look at the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, but it's not a scheme which is working well for everyone at this stage. And certainly if you're hoping to access this scheme to give you a little bit of extra headroom, it's probably not going to work for you. In terms of what information is required, This is just an example of one of the emails that was sent to one of my customers who've applied for the Corona Business Interruption Loan Scheme. But this is the initial information that was required. As you see, a lot of detail, debtors list, creditors list, up-to-date management accounts, cash flow forecasts, personal asset and liability statements, and quite a lot of detail as to what you've done to prove that you've already cut every cost you possibly can cut to reduce your outgoings as far as possible. So a lot of detail. This is not a 5-10 minute application scheme. It's something which is going to take probably a couple of days. And I don't think you're going to get this cash very, very quickly if you do apply for it. What I would say on this scheme is that we're expecting there may be further announcements in the next 24 hours because a lot of these concerns have already gone to the Chancellor. So we may see improvements in this scheme in the days ahead. Something which may be more use and more relevant to a lot of our clients is the support that's available through DBW, or the Development Bank of Wales. For those of you who don't know, this is the old Finance Wales, which was rebranded a couple of years ago and is now essentially a subsidiary of the Welsh Government. And the Welsh Government has given a specific £100 million pot of cash to fund loans to businesses in distress at this time. These loans went live earlier this week. You can apply through the Development Bank's website, and I've got the link there on the slide. That's where you need to go if you want to apply for one of these loans. They're loans that aren't quite as big as the CBILS ones. They're only between £5,000 and £250,000. But there's nothing to pay at all in the first year, so the interest rolls up. And you get a capital holiday as well. No arrangement fees, 2% interest rates. And probably, I think there will be some personal guarantees required, but possibly at lower levels, and some of the banks certainly are asking under the other loan scheme. And probably most importantly, if you have a look at that slide, in terms of the amount of information that's being required, it's an online application form. As I understand it, they believe that can be filled out in 10 to 15 minutes, and the level of other information that's required is really fairly light touch. So loans up to 100,000, as we understand it, all they need is some bank statements and the application form. For larger loans, over 100,000, a little bit more information, historic accounts, and a cash flow template. But again, I've had a look at that cash flow template. It's not a huge document. I think there's 5 different tabs with some relatively basic information. It's the sort of thing I would think most business owners can put together in a few hours and have that application in. And the Development Bank of Wales, I spoke to them this morning. They're confident they can start getting this money out in certainly by the end of this month, if not sooner. So my advice at this stage is if you're really struggling, you desperately need debt into your business to help get through the coming weeks and months, I'd probably apply for the Development Bank of Wales loan first and then go back to CBILS. As I understand it, you can apply for both. So I'd start with the Development Bank of Wales because I think that is going to be a more straightforward application process for most businesses. So just to finish a little bit on the other support that's available, don't forget, obviously, I've already mentioned the fact that you can defer your VAT bills, but for many businesses, it's often corporate tax bills or POI bills that are the big problem. There's no formal deferral mechanisms in place for those liabilities. But if you speak to the revenue on that phone number, we've found over the last week that they've been far more understanding than they have been and will be quite accommodating if you're really struggling to be able to spread some of those liabilities. And then I just wanted to touch as well on the self-employed. So those of you who are self-employed, last week the Chancellor announced additional support for self-employed businesses. There are a number of conditions which I'm going to run through very quickly, but in principle this is to bring self-employed workers into a similar place that the employed people who are employees are. So again, you can get 80% of your trading profits up to a maximum of 2,500 if you've lost earnings because of the coronavirus. In terms of criteria, you needed to have submitted your tax returns for 18-19. You needed to have traded in 19-20. And you need to still be trading or be planning to be trading if it hadn't been for the virus outbreak in the next financial year as well. Just to be aware that you have to have, or your profits needed to be under 50,000. So if you've had profits of over 50,000, either in 18-19, or your average profits over the last 3 years has been over 50,000, you will not be able to apply. And if your taxable income, if more than half your taxable income comes from sources other than self-employment, you will also not be able to apply. So again, we haven't got the full details on this scheme as yet. And we understand the way this is going to work is it's not something you can apply for. The revenue will contact you if you are eligible, but just some crumb of comfort for the self-employed traders out there. You haven't been forgotten about. There is going to be some support for you in the weeks ahead. So just to finish, just to confirm that the best places to go to find out the latest, we've got a very comprehensive website which we are updating on a daily basis with all the latest advice and guidance. So go there to find out what is available to you. And I've also got the key two links, which is the Welsh Government website and the UK Government website, and the information that is available on those, which is always being updated as well. And if you've got any concerns, if you've got any queries about how to apply for any of the grants or how to apply for any of the loans that I've talked about, please speak to us. We've been very, very busy in the last couple of weeks, but things are definitely calming down. If you can't get through to us on the phone, drop us an email and we'll come back to you as quickly as we can. We will be prioritizing and continue to prioritize the customers who need the most help, but we will try and make sure we get back to everyone as soon as possible. And if you've got any specific questions or any concerns that you want us to cover in the next webinar, please email those questions through to mail@bevanbuckland.co.uk, and we'll make sure we cover them off then in the next webinar, which we're hoping to run in the early part of next week when further announcements are made. So thank you very much for listening today. We hope it's been useful, and please keep an eye out for our next webinar, which will be early next week when we've got a little bit more information.